see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Oh, hi, it's Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy. And I'm here with, let me start over again. How do you say that? It's
Stephen.
Stephen. Oh.
Just think of a V.
Steve. Okay, because here it's like kind of Stephen, so I'm just going to change that for myself. Okay, here we go. Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy. And today I'm here with Stephen Carrick-Davies. Thank you very much for joining me today, Stephen.
My pleasure.
So the way that well, let me give a little bit of background. You're a freelance professional working in communications technology, and that's primarily where the technology impacts the lives of children, parenting, schools, and the wider society. And that's kind of what I've seen here about you. And the way I got connected with you was that I saw an article you did in, it was called Empathy Download, and it was on Huffington Post. And it was, in that article, I think you're really calling for promoting empathy online, which is kind of your interest. And is there any kind of more you'd like to do around introducing yourself, kind of your background? And
well, thank you, Edwin. I mean, I've been involved in looking at the issue of children and technology for probably the last 14 or 15 years. I used to run a children's charity or a non-profit organization over here called ChildNet International. And a lot of the work that we did was looking at the misuse of technology, things like cyberbullying. And there's a body of work over here in the UK looking at what's the difference between what you could see as traditional bullying or offline bullying and cyberbullying. And it's interesting the bystander effect, the kind of amplification of or the way that technology amplifies bad behavior. Those things now most schools are recognizing. But in my most recent work, Edwin, I've been working with young people who are very vulnerable or who are excluded, not just from main society in terms of work, but also many young people who've been excluded from schools and are in special schools. And I just was really reminded of the importance, certainly in schools, to help children with their emotional, social development. And it was just almost a throwaway comment that you can't download empathy as you could download a patch on your computer. If your computer has malware or a virus, you're encouraged to download the latest patch that will fix it. And it was a throwaway remark saying that we just cannot quick change, or many people say you can't teach empathy, it can be caught. But this is just a reflection really that many, many young people don't just consume media, they inhabit media. They inhabit this world of Facebook and Twitter and other social networking sites. And it's really, really important that we remind educators that they are getting a lot of their norms and values and their identity from how they behave online.
Okay, so as you were talking, I was just showing some scenes from your some pages from your website, and showed the home page and the about page, and I can see you there in a classroom with some children.
Yeah.
So I showed that. And so these dialogues are really about how do we build a culture of empathy. So I'm looking at how do we promote empathy, at a worldwide cultural level. And so it sounds like your interest is really kind of online. How do we create an online environment for promoting empathy? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, you're right, Edwin. I mean, it was interesting. I was looking at some of the resources that you've put together on your excellent website, and you were asking other better, well-informed and expert commentators than I to talk about what's a metaphor. How do you describe what metaphor is? And I was thinking about that in my environment. I was looking at the technology environment, and I would say that a good metaphor for us to think about when we talk about technology is Bluetooth. Okay, so Bluetooth is, you'll remember, a kind of a personal area network. It can work up to 50 meters, and that's a nice way of saying that, to be really empathetic, you have to be connected. Interesting that with Bluetooth, you can connect up to 10 devices simultaneously in a kind of smaller environment. And even Bluetooth isn't owned by an individual company. It was set up by Ericsson originally in the 90s, and it was then developed by a Bluetooth working group. And it works intuitively to find a connection. It works quickly. Lots of other sort of things we could say about Bluetooth, but I was just thinking, that's what we need to be doing as we get children to connect through technology. We also need to get them to connect emotionally and not necessarily physically. Of course, the whole thing about technology, like we're showing today, we've never met each other before, Edwin. We live thousands of miles away, but we can have a connection. So that's really what I was reflecting on as I was preparing to just talk to you this morning. And obviously the other thing, of course, is what's the opposite of that in a technological sense? It's malware. It's a virus. A virus is something that, obviously breaks connection. It breaks communication. It breaks collaboration. It's cowardly. It destroys something which breaks trust, causes friction, destroys sometimes a valuable asset, and it robs us of what I suppose makes us human. So there's some sort of technology thoughts about empathy, if you like.
Yeah, I love that metaphor because it's like, how do we connect with each other? You and I are connecting right now and interacting, and we have mirror neurons going between us. And it's like, so your metaphor is that connection happens kind of like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, which is the same kind of concept, right? It's like you have two devices, two human beings. And how are they communicating with each other? And that empathy is kind of like this human technology, like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, that lets us connect across space.
Yeah, you're doing that even as you talk, isn't it? We're millions of miles away or thousands of miles away, and yet we're still trying to connect using everything we've got, including our voices and our hands. I suppose one of the things I'd say, though, Edwin, is that when we look at what's happening online and what's happening offline, it's very easy to put it into a silo and say there are things peculiar going on online, and that's true. But I think when I talk to children and young people, I say, what would you do if you weren't using technology? How would you communicate if you are seeing somebody? We know that technology can often be a disinhibitor. That children, I use this phrase from Pink Floyd's The Wall, we have become comfortably numb. I don't know if you remember that wonderful song.
I definitely do, yeah.
It's often that through the technology we are disinhibited. We can say things behind the anonymity, behind the distance, behind the fact that we may not bump into that person. We lose our connection because we're often not seeing each other face to face, although today through Skype and video we are. And I think that there's a real task here. When you asked the question earlier, how do we rediscover and support a culture of empathy? And how do we develop compassion, which is often tied to empathy? I think we really need to take seriously what's happening in this modern space and how children increasingly are communicating through technology. And so, the first thing I would say is, the caveat is I'm not an expert. I'm struggling, like a lot of us are, to make sense of this technology. And secondly, I think we need to have real openness and honesty and creativity in how we explore how technology does in fact impact upon our communication. We mustn't demonize technology. It's wonderful, even the fact that you and I are meeting because you read an article that was posted online and now we're communicating. Of course, the arguments now are well made. This technology is a wonderful way to connect and to collaborate and for us to create. But I think my passion is really to see that modern childhood, we address those issues using modern technology, and we don't, put it in a silo. When we talk about children's well-being, we think about every child matters everywhere. Every child matters online. How we communicate, how we model, how we support children has to have an online dimension.
Yeah, so you're looking at the technology, how it can kind of like to foster the empathic connection, and then you're saying the opposite is the malware. It's something that's kind of destroying, it's destroying kind of the connection in some way. It's actually kind of what's the word for it? If malevolent or no? What's the? You know what I mean? It wants to do damage. A virus actually wants to do damage to you. And then there's also, it's that part that there's actually people who might want to harm and harm others. And then there's also that somehow that we can become alienated and become numbed somehow. it sounds like, and that's also not empathic. That's also a kind of a block to empathy. Is that numbing of which I guess would be a question: is what really kind of causes that numbing? Why do people become numb?
Well, if I knew the answer to that, Edwin, I'd be a very happy man. I think obviously it's complex in that we know about, and again the caveat is I'm not an expert on the childhood development. I work in schools, but I haven't been a teacher all my life. I think as we develop a culture of empathy, of course we can have a focus on technology, and there's a special piece of work that I think needs to be done in that space. But we don't underestimate the importance of formative learning in the home, helping parents, many of whom have not been parented well themselves, what's happening in the curriculum in schools. And I know that there will be other folk in your network that are far more eloquent and far more qualified than I am to talk about those areas. But I wouldn't want to then just sort of jump to the technology. But if we are thinking about the technology, there are things that I think certainly the industry should be doing more creatively to remind users of the enormous power that they have. If we think about what Spider-Man's uncle said to Spider-Man years ago, with great power comes great responsibility. And, I see when my daughter, for example, uses Facebook, there's a lot of communication and contact that could be seen as a bit banal and a bit frivolous. But sometimes the most meaningful relationship she has is when she's able to intervene and encourage somebody, to support somebody. I saw a thread of her communication with her peers the other day where somebody had been, it was quite nasty in school. And you had this torrent of young people saying, "Oh, don't worry, you're not like that, it's okay." And I was able to see that beautiful way of supporting that person through technology. Sorry, I'm going a bit around the houses, but you know what I'm saying? What I'm saying is, as we look at the issues of empathy, we mustn't forget those other main pillars in society, like the family, like schools, like our popular culture. But in the prism of technology, looking through the prism of technology, there are things that I think we could be doing. I did a search just before I came online today saying online empathy, and there was only one very creative questionnaire that you could do online to see whether you were empathetic. Wasn't particularly aimed at children. It was nearly 60 questions. But I think there's a wonderful opportunity to connect with young people using their own media and their own familiar technology that could help us to encourage children to be sensitive and to be really courageous.
Well, I guess so. What is the part that you're really interested in the technology? It's like how to use the technology to create technology that fosters empathic connection, or like what is the kind of the aspect that you're kind of interested in?
Well, I'm looking at a whole range of issues with this recent work called Munch, Poke, Ping. I've even used the terminology that young people use when they're using things like BlackBerry Messenger and Facebook, and I'm trying to help to see what are the issues that they face that causes them distress. So interesting enough, a lot of the things that cause them distress are similar to what we just talked about earlier in terms of malware and viruses. But something like impersonation, there's a phrase over here called fraping, which is a horrible phrase because it slightly denigrates what rape is. But it's about when people jump on your Facebook account because on a mobile phone you haven't set a privacy or a password and impersonate you. And purport to be you, and then say things that are obviously offensive or upsetting. Now, Edwin, that is such a horrible experience for a young person who may be at a sensitive stage in their life and very self-conscious, or being able to question their set of friends, and for somebody to take over their identity and purport to be them, and to shatter that reputation, if you like, Edwin, is horrendous. Now, some of the young people say, "Oh, we can always tell when somebody's been fraped because it's always over the top." But it just shows you how vulnerable young people are in this space. And those young people who have an absence of supportive adults in their lives, who have chaotic backgrounds, who may be influenced by drugs or early experiences of alcohol. And in this country of ours, in the UK, where I'm speaking from, there are over 1 million young people up to the age of 24. So it's not quite children or teenagers, but young people who are NEETs, not in education, employment and training. And we have to be very, very concerned about that. And we have to think, well, who stands to benefit most from this amazing technology? Surely those young people who don't have access to good education or good communications or good resources. So I'm very passionate about the way that technology can be used positively. But I also want to make sure that those of us in policy and those who are making applications and technology leaders really realize that those young people who are vulnerable are often more vulnerable online.
Mm. Yeah, so you can really be taken advantage of online. So there's a lot of just as in real life, not real life, but in physical space, you can be demeaned or put down, and so it can happen. It can just transfer to online as well. But so it's like if we want to use the technology to promote empathy, it seems like there's a lot of ways of doing it. For one is even looking at putting an online curriculum on. There's online. There's the dialogue that's happening now. There's sites that are called like friend sites, for doing Skype calls all around the world for connecting, creating kind of international connection. So it seems like there's a huge potential. I've interviewed people in Pakistan, Jordan, Beijing, and all over Europe. So the potential seems huge for online empathy building processes.
Yeah, I think, Edwin, you make very, very good points there. And over the 90s, I used to run a program called the ChildNet Awards, where we were rewarding young people who were doing, I use this word courageous again. And I think being courageous and being empathetic sometimes are two sides of the coin. We could talk about that later if you like. But I think you're absolutely right. We need to be helping schools to model the positive ways that technology can be used to break down barriers to especially for people groups who are often at loggerheads with each other. And, other people far more qualified than I have made good examples of how the technology can be used. I mean, what we've just seen across the whole of the Arab world, for example, it is well noted. Edwin, I think you're right that if we care about children and young people, we can help them show how they can be empathetic online. I think there is a block in this country, particularly, and probably in other parts of the world, where schools and curriculums are under great pressure to teach the nuts and bolts of education. And I've seen, sadly, that a lot of this social, educational, emotional literacy is often squeezed out of the curriculum. There's different times of a government's life, or different times where the legislative looks at aspects of attainment and qualifications and standards. We're told about standards all the time. But I keep reminding teachers when I work with them that the whole point of schools is to prepare children for life outside the school gates. And in those environments, being online is such a huge part of life, sadly, outside of the school gate. I would love schools to be doing just what you've been saying there, to showcase and to model and to champion and to pioneer exciting ways where we can show how the technology really does make a positive difference, and how you can become more connected, another part of being empathetic, of course, and being imaginative. Again, a lot of the actors we know about talk about the importance of empathy in acting, and showing your side to others is a very brave thing, and I think technology can have a way of doing that.
Yeah, I think in your article you coined the term e-pathy, a new e-pathy, to remind us of our humanity and curb the actions of many internet users who risk becoming comfortably numb. So what did you mean by the e-pathy? What was that?
Edwin, I'm a bit of a wordsmith, and I instead of empathy, I was just thinking about what is the empathy online. And so, just like we say e-learning or e-commerce, I was just talking about e-empathy. And this is something I would throw back to you and to your network. If there was a piece of work that we could look at together collaboratively, internationally, helping us to at least identify good practice and pockets of outstanding work where we are using the technology to break down barriers and to be more empathetic, that would be something that I'd love to contribute to. And just to remind people of the tremendous, as we just said here, the tremendous power that technology does have to break down barriers and to reconnect. And also, I think, giving confidence to educators and to parents, And when they are often very dismissive about children's use of technology, and they can often be quite sensationalist in saying, oh, it's just a waste of time. I've had people telling me that it's not the real world, oh, it's not the real world, get a life. Well, that's such a value judgment to children whose life is that real world. I think one of the most interesting experiences I had of being empathetic online was when I saw my very young child about sort of 6 or 7 years ago. He was crying, Edwin, when he had one of his little Lego Star Wars characters on this CD-ROM had died. And I came in after he'd been playing this for half an hour, and he was very, very upset, and he was crying, actually, he was crying. And I said to him, darling, what's the matter? Why are you crying? It's only a game. And I suddenly heard myself say, it's only a game. And then I realized, well, for him, it was his real world. It had been as important as if he had been building Lego on the carpet and his brother had kicked it over. Would that be any less real? So I think a lot of us bring our own prejudices and our own view of childhood from our own view of when we were children. And it has changed quite significantly over those years. And it's a brave adult to say, look, I want to be a learner. I want to understand the feelings that you get. My daughter says she's more popular than I am because she has more friends on Facebook. Mm-hmm. And I've had this great discussion with her about, a friend or an acquaintance. What does it mean to be a friend? Would she share all that personal information to all those 300 or 400 friends that she's got on Facebook? And that's another element of what it means to be real with people. And actually the terms we use online can be very different, and we're all in a learning curve about this, Edwin. We need to suspend our judgment, learn, listen, be very careful that we learn from those young experts, if you like, who are using the new technologies.
One thing I've been asking people, I've been starting, besides the metaphors, which I find is kind of enlightening somehow, is what people's most important values are. What would you say your most important value is in life?
Well, it picks up with another question that I was thinking about, is when did I become empathetic, or what influenced me? And that goes back to the values. I first became more empathetic as a very young child. It sort of caught up on me gradually. I had the privilege of being brought up in the foothills of the Himalayas in Nepal, where my parents were doctors in a leprosy hospital. And I think that goes back to this other point of saying, I think you can't really be empathetic unless you're courageous. I'm sure you can, but it goes hand in hand. And obviously you also need to think very carefully about compassion and the value of imagination in being empathetic. And so I suppose my understanding of empathy came through my recognition, even as a very young child, seeing my parents be very compassionate. They made sacrifices. They left a very consumerist 1960s and 70s Britain to go and work abroad. They weren't paid. It was very much having to raise their own money. I remember seeing my first dead person at the age of 5.5, 6. I still remember it very carefully. My parents, we walked past a corridor in the hospital, and my parents said, that man has died. And he died from, I think, leprosy or another illness. And I think, we are very comfortable, go back to this phrase, comfortably numb, and comfort and being isolated and being dispassionate often is the antithesis of being empathetic. And I think sometimes you say that the brightest stars shine in the desert or the darkest night, and often while our view of empathy is brought up by people's courage and people's love and people's service to other people, and that of course doesn't make me sound like a saint or in any way sanctimonious as I'm a servant, but I think being empathetic has to have a caring and an imagination of the other person. You've, from your very wonderful website, talked a whole range of definitions about empathy, and putting yourself in one's shoes is so important. And I'm not saying that people don't do that online. I think people do. I think they do it online and offline. But how can we engender a culture where people really are not being cruel? I was over in America recently in Harvard with the Berkman Institute for the Internet, and the Lady Gaga Foundation was being launched, called Born This Way. And she talks about trying to empower young people to stop this casual cruelty. A lovely phrase, well, not a lovely thing, but a phrase that just jumped on my imagination, casual cruelty. And I think young people are often disinhibited and do things online because they think it's fun, because there's a humor element, because the bystander effect, because of the pass it on culture. I'm just rambling here, Edwin, so feel free to just jump in and stop me at any stage. But my point is that, we do need to think very carefully about how we get young people to be brave and to be courageous and to do the right thing. And actually what Lady Gaga has done is actually make anti-bullying cool. And being able to stand up and do the right thing is a different way of approaching it. Not that you have to be a goody-goody, but you can actually be a hero. You can be a brave person to stand up and speak up, especially online where people are cowardly. They do take a coward position sometimes of hiding behind the screen, not being able to see that person, and just entering into this spewing of vile and inappropriate communication.
Yeah, well, we were kind of talking about technology, but the technology is maybe just a manifestation of our underlying values.
Yeah.
So whatever if our values is domination or whatever, it seems that the technology will just be a manifestation. That if our values are caring and empathy, then the technology will become a manifestation of that. So it seems like the work is really around looking at what are our values, and it sounds like for you, the courage, and I guess it's the courage to reveal yourself, to be who you are, and to be seen for that, because society kind of punishes us for being who we are in a lot of cases, and so we kind of try to conform and contort. And for me, actually, that part of courage, if we have a culture of empathy, that really means to me that everybody is seen and accepted for who they are, because it's like putting yourself in someone's shoes without judgment. And so almost it's like, if I'm with someone who really cares about me and doesn't judge me and is empathic, I don't even feel courageous kind of being who I am, because I know I'm not going to be punished for being who I am.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is very, very important is stories, Edwin. And of course, online, you just get so many people's stories every day on Facebook. People are sharing about their lives. I was talking to a head teacher of my children's school, and I talked to him about empathy, and I said, give me a picture of empathy. Tell me a story. And he says he remembers a story that was told to him when he was young. He grew up just after the war. And between Sweden and Denmark, there was, in the war, a very great tension in that one of the countries was invaded by the Nazis and the other one wasn't. And some courageous men and women who were fishermen hid Jewish people in the bow of a ship and took them across to the land, I think it was Denmark, that wasn't, Sweden, that wasn't occupied. And at one stage, the Nazis surrounded a boat, and one of the soldiers went on board to do a search, and he was asked, are there any Jewish people on that boat? And he lifted up a hatch, and in the hatch he just saw probably 50 pairs of eyes looking up, reflecting in the moonlight. And the voice came from the other ship, are there Jews, are there Jews? And the man put the hatch down. He said, no, only fish. And of course, that man risked enormous potential risk of being shot himself, because that was, colluding with the enemy, if you like, or not doing his soldier's business. And it just struck me that, sometimes telling a story to a child, a young person, about great acts of heroism, it helps us to remember the importance of doing the right thing, of reaching out, of connecting with our humanity. When I work in schools, I say to kids, some of your parents will say that Facebook is a waste of time and that it's not important. And I say to them, what would Martin Luther King have done if he'd had a Facebook page? It's not a bad question to ask. How can we show that the technology, as you said earlier, almost just reflects what we are as an individual and our values, and we can be bold and brave? One of the things I say to kids, I think Facebook's a wonderful thing, but sometimes every week, just try to send something that's positive, try to send something that's going to inspire somebody, try to help stand up for somebody or comment on something that's been really good, that's moved you. And films, of course, are a huge way. I was reading again online today, just thinking about empathy, and so many people like, Mel Streep, she says, one of the reasons why I'm an actress is that, it gives her a tremendous way of showing empathy, of being able to connect. It's, the great gift of human beings is that we have the power of empathy, she says. And films and storytelling is such a wonderful way of doing that. And I think we need to, in a way, instead of inventing new ways to connect with empathy, recognizing the things that we've got, like, our work in schools, like storytelling, like heroes, and reminding people that they are the game changers in this world.
Yeah, I've been interviewing some artists as well, because I think that's such a great way to promote or really convey empathy is through the arts. So through dance, through storytelling, through movies, especially. Yeah. So I think there's I think you mentioned that page about the definition of empathy. Part of it is I see that, empathy is kind of like 4 parts to it, kind of the self-empathy, awareness of ourselves, kind of a mirrored empathy through mirror neurons, perspective taking, kind of imaginative empathy and empathic action. And it seems that the arts really kind of really hit people at that mirrored felt level of empathy, so.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a wonderful definition that starts with self and then looks at the mirror, how you're perceived by others, and then a wider perspective, and then actually moving into action. Some of the new tools give us wonderful ways to be real online. I mean, a lot of this kind of boast by post environment means that you often pretend to be something else. I'm just trying to work on a new platform where I could help children to reflect on a profile that is more fit for purpose for the world of work. And some of the things I've been saying to people, give me 3 words that other people would describe you as being. And of course, you might say to me, Steve, that's a bit tokenistic or a bit trivial. People can always lie and people can make up great words. But it does give us a starting conversation with people to say, look, if somebody's making a film about you, where would they put the camera? If somebody was going to write 3 words on your gravestone, what would they say? And so I think the creative arts and the way that we could be more creative online gives us a chance to do that. And again, please, I am just a learner, and I am just somebody who's struggling with this with everybody else. I don't even see myself as an expert at all. But what a privilege to be able to influence a generation or influence young people in this space. I've just come from a policy exchange meeting in London today called Digital for Good, or there's another organization called Apps for Good, which is trying to really pioneer and profile the ways that young people can use apps on an iPhone or on an iPad or on other devices, and other Apple devices, other devices than Apple are good as well. But how can we engender that innovation and that creativity? We've seen different movements come and go. I'm nearly 50, and I grew up through a lot of the music movements where you had tremendous people here in the UK pioneer a resensitizing of our global responsibilities, and things like Band-Aid and things more recently like Comic Relief, where they've used humor, they've used the arts, they've used music to fight against social injustice, to bring a sense of our humanity. In the 80s, it was very much within Ethiopia. I would love to see others who are courageous in using new technology to make that connection. And sometimes these things happen almost by serendipity, almost by, an unintended consequences of doing something. Facebook, if it was a country, it'd be the 3rd largest country in the world, nearly 850 million people using it. This is tremendous way of breaking down barriers. The hashtag on Twitter, you saw in the Arab world, people holding up just a hashtag, and a wonderful way to really understand what's going on and to connect with people. So I think, without making any type of, this is eminently sensible and it's just obvious, isn't it? But we just need to remind ourselves, let us try and inspire teachers, let us try and inspire parents, let's try and inspire ourselves, but also let's try to inspire the entrepreneurial innovation and people who are working in industry in this white heat of technology to not forget the tremendous responsibility we have to make the world a better place and to use technology not just to make money and to continually spew out just the kind of ongoing, communication, but to try to inspire people to do the right thing. The hope effect of the net, if you like. How can we make the internet a place? And Tim Berners-Lee and others who invented the internet actually said they didn't invent it as a social, and particularly as a technical tool. They invented it as a social tool to help make the world a better place. And I think we need to remember that as we encourage young people to use technology.
So it sounds like what you're trying to do is kind of brainstorm, think around the technology and how to use it to kind of promote pro-social values, empathy being one of them. So is that kind of what your kind of focus is? Is you're
Yes,
kind of looking creatively for new ways of doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I speak from a person who did a lot of work in this whole area called e-safety, or social responsibility online. And a lot of the debate was talking about things like predators and cyberbullying and the reliability of information. I mean, the whole e-safety world is quite broad. But I'm coming away from just talking about applications or particular issues like cyberbullying. And of course, there's some nuances there. And we talked about some of the ways that cyberbullying is different from bullying. But to sort of step back and think about, things like resilience, empathy, courage. And these are broader themes that, first of all, lots of teachers have so much positive experience on. Lots of teachers coming into the world of technology feel scared because it's technology and they didn't grow up in this world and they don't see the attraction or even the fascination of something like social networking. And they would look at YouTube and think, what a complete waste of time. But we need to acknowledge and affirm what our teachers and what so many of us as parents have struggled with is understanding what makes a child, the idea of being life literate, even if you're not tech literate. And I think there's a piece of work that I'd love to do, which is trying to realize how empathy is diluted, but also is strengthened online. How when resilience, and God knows that young people need to have a tremendous amount of resilience online because so many things happen very quickly and they can feel offended or they can be upset about a photograph and the whole thing about what is private anymore and what goes online stays online and all these things. How do we strengthen and support and encourage the teaching of resilience? How do we, going back to courage, how do we help children to do the right thing and to stand up? And that's why the Lady Gaga Born This Way Foundation is doing some great work at trying to cultivate this empowered young person, not just as a young person who is a passive victim or is vulnerable, but actually has tremendous power online to do the right thing and collectively and aggregate the positive. So that's something what I'm interested in, and be delighted to continue to share, but also to learn from your network and to recognize that in a way, Edwin, I use this phrase maybe to finish off our discussion, that big fish are caught in little nets. Often we think about a huge national program. Sometimes we think about, well, shouldn't Facebook or Microsoft or Google be doing this? But let's remember that authentic small scale actions make a big difference. In the UK here, we're told by the government that we want a big society, that we want to suddenly get everybody doing the big thing. And I think, well, that's one thing, but it's a bit of a jargon, really. And I think we want the good society, not the big society. That sometimes the small things we do and the things we acknowledge that are small, but very, very beautiful and very, very precious. It's just a reframing of that, if you like, and saying we want the small society, we want lots of little small societies that really are authentic and build our world to be a better place. And as we've said today in this dialogue, technology has a wonderful role in that. But it is not the be-all and end-all. It's not a silver bullet to suddenly make young people empathetic or resilient. That's where families and parenting, and to affirm parenting again. In the UK, it's just parents are always blamed as the fault. We had disruption in the streets last summer, and they blame the technology and they blame the police and then they blame the youth workers and they blame the government, but then they always come down to blaming the parents. Well, that's so demoralizing, and it's so difficult to be a parent these days, and we need to affirm parenting, and we need to sort of say it's about being a good enough parent, And part of being a good enough parent, I think, is helping children to really connect and to be empathetic. And I love your phrase of a mirror test, testing how you would feel if that happened to you. These things that we know are so important as children develop. And this is, I think, something of what I'm trying to say to you today, that, let's remember the God-given opportunities we have every day to make a difference. And where there's opportunities to be more creative and innovative and entrepreneurial using technology to do that, by all means, I'd be the first person to come and listen to somebody who wants to do that and to join and help in a limited experience that I've got. But good luck.
Great. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to, share some of your thoughts and experiences. And, this is like an ongoing project and quest and movement building. Actually, it's like, how can we work together to build a movement to promote empathy and build a culture of empathy? So it's kind of step by step, one interview at a time, one connection at a time. So
yeah. Well, people who might be watching this later on can contact me through my website, www.carrick-davies.com. That's CARRICK-Davis with an E. And I'd be delighted to collaborate or to share and to learn from others who have vast experience in this interesting and important issue of empathy online.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Steve. We'll keep in contact then.
Yeah. Good to talk to you, Edwin.
Bye.
Good luck with your work.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.